I asked you to reduce this expression to see if you could still capture all the IP addresses without breaking them apart, but using a shorter expression. Now, let's try to do that really quick. So you might think to yourself, well, you know, this whole thing with the 1 to 3 digits and the dot, that whole thing repeats 3 times. So maybe I just, specify the number of repetitions, get rid of the duplicate stuff, and then keep the stuff that's not a duplicate. That's not an exact duplicate anyway. Yeah, we could do that, but notice how everything stops matching. And that's because what we're saying here is we want a digit that occurs 1 to 3 times, followed by a dot that occurs exactly 3 times. The dot occurs 3 times. This repetition operator immediately connects to what precedes it. Now, we don't really want 3 dots. We want 3 sets of 1 to 3 digits and a dot. Now, if you think about this for a second, and also if you look over here on the cheat sheet, then you might find this capture everything enclosed tip. And also, if we think about order of operations and math, it's pretty natural that we would want to surround this with a set of parentheses. Now, notice that when I do that, a couple of things happen. One, we get our full match back. We are matching on the IP. But notice something else is happening too. And we're even getting some special highlighting over here in our regex expression area, right? And notice that we're getting some special highlighting over here in our expression area. When we use parentheses, we're creating something called a grouping. A grouping says, yes, I understand that you have a full match, you have this large matching thing, but from that, we're going to grab a subset match, a sub-match called a grouping. And we're going to list that as a separate match. And what is it really matching on at this point? Well, the way that this works, especially with this repetition item, that grouping will match the final member of that repetition. So in this case, it's 149 dot, because that is the third segment being matched in this set of 3 that we're looking for. And to be honest with you, we really don't want to treat that particular segment as a separate segment. But we still need the parentheses. We still need to say, treat this as a group for the purposes of the repetition. We're going to come back to how we can kind of avoid matching this thing as a separate group, but still keep it as part of the full match. For the moment, let's still play with groupings a little bit more. Maybe what we want is we want to capture this last segment of the IP address because on a small internal network, that last item, if it is dedicated to a specific device, will help you ID which device that is. So for our intents and purposes today, let's refer to this final segment as the device ID. Let's pretend for a moment that we want to capture this device ID as a separate value. We want it to be its own group. So how do we do that? Well, just like up here, we made a grouping by surrounding our pattern with parentheses. We're going to surround this final pattern in its own parentheses. And notice that it shows up as group 2. So now as a separate group, we have this device ID. But wait, Professor Krebs, we don't really want to treat this first group as its own value. And I agree with you, we don't. In JavaScript, there is a way to create what's called a non-capturing group. In fact, if you look over here in our quick reference guide, we've been looking mostly at the common tokens, but that's not the same thing as all tokens. And you can see that we have general tokens and anchors and meta and all this other stuff, right? There's also group constructs. Let's click on that for a second. And notice that we have capture everything enclosed, and then we have match everything enclosed. Notice that they're separating capture from match, because match has to do with finding the whole pattern, whereas capture has to do with grouping up a sub-pattern. It's a very subtle difference in language, and it can be a little annoying sometimes. But what they really mean is this is called a non-capturing group. We're grouping so that we can match on it, but we don't want to capture that as a separate group. So if we apply that logic to this group 1 that we don't really want as a separate group, but we still want to match on, then what we have to do is go inside that grouping right after the opening parenthesis, and we're going to drop a question mark and a colon. Notice what happens to our results now. We still match on the entire IP. We still get that as part of our full match, and our first grouping is now our device ID. This is how we can use groupings to still maintain the integrity of our final match while shortening our expression. And we can also use groupings to capture subdata that matters to us while ignoring subdata that doesn't.